Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darlene Freeman, and I am so honored to be able to introduce Mr. John Archibald. Now, on May 8th, we all remember where we were, right? John certainly remembers where he was.
I don't remember anything for the next 3 days.
I woke up and I immediately go to my phone and scroll through the news. That's my morning routine. And I learned that John Archibald won his second Pulitzer Prize. So we have with us today a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. He's been a tireless advocate for the truth and for people who have been wronged by those in power. His work has exposed corruption, injustice, and abuse of power at all levels of government. So I pulled this off of his website. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, podcaster, author, speaker, teacher, storyteller, wannabe playwright, general ass, but not by today's standards. He wrote the book, Shaking the Gates of Hell, A Search for Family and Truth in the Wake of the Civil Rights Revolution. It was published in 2021. In 2020-2021, he was also a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. And this is when he did a study about how the digital age has changed journalism and how the coverage, the news coverage of crime and corruption and police affect and change our perspective of crime. So you can see how all of this ties into what happened in Brookside, Alabama. So I am just very, very pleased, and I am so looking forward to seeing a play called Pink Cloud that seems to have a bit of a dark theme, but I'm sure will be humorous and moving while still being relevant to our lives here in the American South. So be sure to sign up for his newsletter so that you don't miss anything that is going on. And John, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. No worries. I am really, really happy to be here to talk to the League of Women Voters. In a lot of ways, I feel like the League of Women Voters is responsible, some would say to blame, for my being where I am in life. You guys in John Mellencamp, I guess. I fight authority. Authority always wins. But not always, as we find out. I had an aunt. She's a great aunt, really, in all the senses of the word, who was a League of Women Voters member and committed her life to the process of democracy and to making me aware of the world around me. Elizabeth Archibald was her name. We called her Gigi. I don't have any idea why. But she traveled the world. This was years and years ago. Traveled the world, went to Red China before most Westerners could do that, and took me every year to the, what they call it, the Birmingham Festival of Arts every year. Does anybody remember that? It's where they adopted a city for every year and would take it out there, and so she'd take me out there and buy berets for me or whatever the kind of city was, just to make sure that I was aware of other cultures. And she never told me what to think or anything like that. But when I didn't understand a little reference in a conversation, you know, she would send me in the next week a book on cultural literacy. And when I didn't understand a little obscure fact, she sent me a book, you know, Facts of the World That Everyone Should Know. It was her subtle way, I guess, of telling me that I had no basic knowledge. It went on. She, when I first got engaged, she invited my fiance at the time to go to a League of Women Voters meeting first thing. And then when we got married, she sent me a copy of Emily Post's Book of Etiquette. I was sort of afraid to ask if those two things were related, but they probably were. But you know, Gigi was questioning and diplomatic and persistent and graceful in her own offbeat sort of way. She never raised her voice or argued her point in an angry sort of way. She never called people names or walked away because somebody had a different view than she did. And yet she changed the way that I thought about everything without ever telling me how to think about anything. And it changed the way I saw the world. And am I doing that?
I was thinking, why don't we try to change minds? I don't know if that matters.
It's not my microphone.
I don't know, we good?
Yeah.
Yeah, she changed the way I thought just by being herself. And so I am grateful to the influence of this group. And I have always sort of really just admired it. So usually when I get up to talk these days, I talk about, you know, banging our heads against the wall. How the winning brand of Southern politics is racist and homophobic and xenophobic and transphobic and myopic and fear-mongering and mean. I talk about how voting isn't so much of seen as a right these days, but a political tool. I talk about how people vote against those who are different from them in order to feel bigger and better, leaving us all smaller and worse off. But you know all that. And I don't really want to talk about all that today. I mean, don't get me wrong, I could. I mean, we lead the nation in mental health disorders and preventable hospitalizations, low birth weight babies, sleep disorders, depression, bad health outcomes, poor physical health, obesity, arthritis, kidney disease, lung problems, diabetes, high blood pressure and cholesterol, gun violence, and premature death. And that is just the start. And so we build prisons and sell guns and politicians. And deny our history. I was really fuming recently about, you know, these absurd critical race theory bills that are going around the country in order, you know, that white kids don't feel guilty about centuries of oppression. And a New York Times story came across my desk in which you probably saw it. There was an elementary textbook in Florida that included this particular rundown on Rosa Parks. This is the Rosa Parks history that fourth graders in Florida were supposed to get. Rosa Parks showed courage. One day she rode the bus. She was told to move to a different seat. She did not. She did what she believed was right. And that's the story of Rosa Parks.
Wow.
She's not a civil rights hero in that book. She's a lesson in stand your ground. So I'm surprised they didn't have her with an AR-15. What are we doing? It's enough to make you wonder whether, I've done this a lot lately too, whether that moral arc of the universe really does bend toward justice. I think I'm like, Dr. King said that, but Theodore Parker said it like in the late 1800s, and I think I'm on board with Theodore Parker, who said, I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. By conscience. And if you look at our history, from slavery to Reconstruction to the Klan to the Alabama Constitution, which was written for the express purpose of codifying white supremacy, to lynchings and Jim Crow, and the beatings and bombings and stands in the schoolhouse door and ridiculous CRT laws that whitewash our real history, it seems to me that with every move we've had, there's been a very marked and distinct and intentional backlash. With every bit of progress, there has been backlash, which is, strains the conscience, but it's also good to know because it can sort of help us deal with it when it happens now. But sometimes it does seem like we are beyond hope. The Voting Rights Act itself is a shell of itself. Voter suppression is an art form these days, and gerrymandering is big business, and bigots of all description have been given permission to say things that in my youth would have shocked the whole country and shamed their families. It's enough to make you lose faith in that arc of the universe. But that's okay, because to presume that the arc of the universe bends towards justice takes the responsibility out of our hands. And the truth is that the arc of anything never moves on its own. It's bent, by time and time again by the people that have the strength and the tenacity and the will to make the world a better place. And maybe we live to see it, and maybe we don't. But I don't think that's the point. A lot of this stuff I tell myself all the time in order to feel better. Don't get me wrong. But the point I always thought was to be, decent. And by that I mean to be an ambassador of decency, to acknowledge the place of others in the world, to care about the earth and how we leave it, to want others to share the opportunities that we've had, to err on the side of forgiveness, to appreciate differences, to live in awe, as I like to think of it, instead of fear. I've given myself that pep talk a lot, because I believe it. I believe we change the world 1 minute at a time in those minutes when that magic happens. And I tell it most when the legislature is in session, because Lord knows that's a dangerous time. But thinking of what you control is way healthier than thinking what you can't. And the legislature is in session right now, of course, and has done some pretty nasty things. But I'm glad Carla Crowder's sitting in the back. Y'all know Carla Crowder from Alabama Appleseed. But the legislature, something happened this week that not only gives me more hope than my little pep talk can give me, but it proves it's true. And for a brief moment last week, when it all came together, conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, came together and did what I tend to think of as the unthinkable. And that's, they had different goals for getting there, but they got to a place where they did the right thing. So I'm wondering if lightning struck somewhere and who got hit, but for that moment it happened, and both houses approved a bill that makes it just a little bit harder for courts to suspend Alabama driver's licenses, and just a little bit easier for Alabamians who've made a mistake to keep their driver's licenses. And it's a big thing to somebody like me who has railed on for way too long about fines and fees, about the damage it causes to people, particularly people who can't afford them, and what a terrible economic policy it is for a state to rely on the criminalization of the poorest people in the state in order to fund at least 17 different departments in the state. And it's remarkable that bill is now sitting on, unless something happened this morning, is now sitting on Kay Audie's desk waiting signature. And it's not a perfect bill. It's not what everybody would, a lot of people would ask for. But it means that people who screw up once don't automatically lose their license. They won't have to choose between whether they drive to work to support their family and break the law doing it, and risk being ticketed again and falling into a cycle of debt they can never get out of. It's a remarkable thing, and this effort to make Alabamians and their leaders understand the pitfalls of fines and fees, and this policy has been going on for years, and license revocation specifically. And somehow, this is the remarkable thing, somehow Alabama politicians on both sides of the aisle got that, which means that they believe that Alabamians specifically got that. And that's a major, major thing. And it happened because a lot of people really worked their butts off for years, and people like Carla and Leah Nelson at Alabama Appleseed, who live every day for that stuff that I call decency. And people like former cop Jerry Wiley, who was a captain in the Birmingham police force, and saw people, ticketed over and over again and unable to pay it, and unable to lead regular lives simply because of the fact that they couldn't pay for running a stop sign bill that most of us would pay and move on and think nothing about. Maybe the drumbeat of horror stories about fines and fees made a dent. Maybe it was just time, but it was a rare moment that really should be cherished in my mind. And the unlikely pairing of Senator Will Barfoot, Republican, and Marika Coleman, Democrat, it deserves a nod. And Alabama Rising, that the League of Women Voters itself, who I understand, helped conduct surveys years ago that helped put this into perspective, and that were used by Appleseed on a lot of informational things that were critical in getting this stuff passed. But the work Appleseed did represents everything I believe about bending that arc of justice. Leah was relentless and diplomatic and armed with facts and data and people, and a willingness, this is the willingness to smile and be gracious and to talk over and over again with people who she didn't share a single view with, I'm sure, or people who thought they didn't share a view with her. And like Gigi, my great aunt, she I'm pretty sure she never got angry or at least showed anger or those things. Maybe Gigi sent her some books too. But you know, for a moment we saw how politics is supposed to work, and you know, for a long time we just don't seem to see that so much. And I really needed it, to be honest with you. At a dark point, a little while ago, I was trying to find a way to write about hope, because I think it's important to write about hope from time to time. And in order for me to do that, a lot of the times I have to ask readers to tell me stories of hope, because in my job, the one thing that can give me hope is readers. And they inevitably tell stories that that make me realize that the world is not out in the legislature, and the world is bigger than that. And most people you meet are better than we often believe when we follow these things too closely. But a friend of mine sent me this this note. He said, "There's value in fighting even when you lose," which does sound a little bit like Harper Lee, but there's value in fighting even when you lose. A state that was truly beyond hope would not produce so many people struggling to bring the dawn. And I'm looking at y'all, and I'm looking at you, and I'm looking at everybody who made this stuff happen. And you know, sometimes you do win. And you've got to celebrate that. And sometimes when you do win, we all win. And I'd like to think that happened this week. So welcome to the dawn in Alabama. I hope that this can show us how it works. And that's a very positive message from somebody like me. So if you're expecting something else, you probably were right. But I feel good about what happened, and I feel grateful for what happened, and y'all are lucky that you get to hear the people you'll get to hear on this panel later on. The newsletter, if you would sign the newsletter, you know, we talked about the algorithms. The news business is crazy right now. You know, we don't have a paper anymore. A lot of things that we have on our website are hard to find. The good stuff's hard to find. The stuff about Walmart's closing in Portland's real easy to find. So we're all trying to, you know, adapt to the newest thing. And the newest thing right now is newsletters. And so all that is I just put my columns and some other stuff in and send them out on Tuesdays to your inbox if you want them, which also creates problems because I end up writing only to people who want to hear me. But I have well, I'll stop talking about it. If you want to sign up. But does anybody have any questions they want to ask or comments they want to make?
Let me get a microphone.
I don't know if I should ask it. What are we going to do about Tommy Tuberville?
Here's a question back here.
Well, she had a question. She said, "What are we going to do about Tommy Tuberville?"
We're one partisan group here.
I guess we could run Nick Saban.
Yes, my question deals with the decisive measure bill that's probably going through the legislature right now. And why is KI paying for advertising for the Civil Rights Trail, but yet they don't want to get taught that in schools? I mean, talk about hypocritical. I mean, nobody's saying anything to her about it. Nobody's challenging this. Maybe you should say something. Why is this happening? Why do I have to watch this on TV and then look at my legislature and say, no, we're not going to teach that to these young black kids?
Or white.
It's on the list now that you mention it. Right in front of what we're going to do about Tommy Tuberville.
Thank you.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, we're giving a lot of money to the Confederate museums or whatever, and denying people the right to know the true history of the place they live. And I mean, it's hard to say don't give money to the Civil Rights Trail. It's just like, I mean, the way we tell our story is pretty shameful in a lot of ways, at least as a state. I mean, there are a lot of entities that do a pretty good job of it themselves, but as a state, we've abandoned our responsibility on that. But yeah, I can write a hypocrisy column.
Right itself.
That's the problem. This stuff is too easy.
Okay, so I'm live. For those of us who are interested in actually consuming real news, as opposed to who Paris Hilton is marrying or not marrying, what would you recommend for us to read?
Me.
Well, of course, but I'm talking about after you.
Yeah, and the problem. I was talking to this with Judge Johnson earlier. The problem is a problem of distribution. And many things, but like at AL.com, where we have a lot of the better reporting that we do is often obscured by a lot of the things that are what I would call clickbait, and the algorithms that create those mean that the things that are being the most read are the ones that are the most prominent, and so the things that are most prominent are very rarely the same things as the things that are the most important, which is a structural problem in my view, but it's common. It's not just us, it's common all over the place. So finding the things on that site that are important is difficult. They're there, I promise you there's good stuff there. It's just often hard to find. And so we're trying a number of different methods to get around that. And so, whether that's successful or not with this Birmingham lead thing they're doing, or Huntsville and Mobile, I don't know how that's going to work. But I would tell you to read the Washington Post, and I'd tell you to read, there's a new group called the Alabama Reflector that's being run by Brian Lyman, who's in my view, the best reporter in Alabama, who was long at the Montgomery Advertiser, and they're putting out some really good things that are good hard news about Alabama. I would trust them. And, I would read the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Atlantic and the New Yorker, but that tells you a lot about me, rather than what you want. So I think there is a lot of, the difficulty these days is not that news reporting is not being done, it's that you have to piecemeal it together with a buffet of people you've come to trust, and I would just hope to be among them.
Hi, John. I enjoy reading and.
Where are you?
I'm over here.
Oh.
Sorry, right next to Barbara. I enjoy reading and listening to your more in-depth, investigative type work, and I was just curious, like how you come up with that, how you decide what you're going to talk about, and do you have what's the next big thing you're going to be looking into?
Good question. This may be a longer answer than you want, but I spent a lot of last year working on this Brookside thing because I went off and did this fellowship and I wrote this book, and I came back and I was really, really disillusioned with the whole notion of what I do for a living, which was opinion writing at that moment. What the world needs now is not another hot take, and so I wanted to get back to my roots a little bit and do more depth stuff, and the company had gotten a grant from Columbia University to do a piece on criminalization of poverty, which is something I've always been interested in since Harpersville was, jailing people for debt. And so I committed to doing that, and I went around, was talking to all these people, advocates and lawyers and whatnot about, criminalization of poverty is a really, really important issue, but getting people to read about it is like pulling teeth, because a lot of people can't put themselves in a position or don't want to put themselves in a position of thinking that, that could happen to them. And I was sitting down with Carla Crowder. Sorry, Carla, and I said, what's happening? And she said, there's something going on in Brookside. I think this is the right quote. There's something going on in Brookside. I'm not sure what it is, but you ought to take a look. And when I took a look, it just rolled out like a waterfall. And so that's that. And so part of it is being able to just kind of take the time to do that. And what was the second part of your question? So that turned out to be pretty successful. and it's in this day and age in this world to be able to write something that kind of has as much impact as that did is really, really rare. I mean, they changed laws. The police chief was essentially reduced, about 80%. Judges dismissed charges. The DA dropped charges. Laws changed. Everything. All these things happened. Judges barred from ever being a judge again. But I keep saying this over and over again. I've done a lot of stuff over the years that put people in jail and cost politicians their jobs, and all that's good journalism. But when people come to you and say, "I got my life back," that's the best thing I've ever experienced in 37 years of journalism. And it makes me want to do more of it. So what am I going to do next? We ended up getting another grant from Columbia because they were pleased with that one. And we're going to be looking at paroles. And hopefully we'll have a real, they're paroling 3% of people at the moment. That's crazy. And so we want to tell a lot of stories out of that. And I'm going to spend a lot of time this year on that. And hopefully we'll find something good. Also doing a podcast on Eric Robert Rudolph, and which is if y'all remember Eric Robert Rudolph, he was the bomber of the abortion clinic here in 1998, which is 25 years ago now, and also the Olympic bomber, and I want to look at that not only as sort of, I covered a lot of it at the time, but not only as a sort of true crime entertainment thing, but because but it also sort of is a way to look at the evolving thought on abortion rights and some of the extremist elements of that. So I'm hoping that that'll be something good too. So, and I keep writing columns and newsletters. So.
All right, one more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
That's what you're saying is I should have been answering more briefly. I have wind me up and stuff does come out of my mouth. Can we have two? Give us two.
Okay, two questions.
Since talk shows seem so effective in getting information out, whether it's right or wrong, have you ever thought about having a talk show so that book just can get out nationwide? Because we're like starved.
Hold on, just 1 second.
From a non. Start over, or did you hear?
No, you're saying talk shows are effective in getting things out, and
Information.
do I have any aspirations or?
Yes. And looking for something else to do that would be effective and helpful.
I do. My whole goal in life right now is to, it's the whole thing with the plays and all that stuff, is that I truly believe that you have to reach people in the places where they can be reached. And people don't get a newspaper every day now. People can't get a newspaper here. And read. So you want to reach them where they get their information. And so, yeah, and I'm in talks right now to do some collaboration with some. Yes, the answer is yes. And I may be doing that soon. We fight authority, so you can ask me another question.
You mentioned earlier, and you made in an undertone, you said rebuild in Alabama, and it made me think about.
I said what? I'm sorry.
Rebuild in Alabama, and on my way up here from Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, the road was so rough with all these patches everywhere. And I just started talking to myself, and I said myself because nobody was human in it but me. But I said to myself, okay, all these rough roads that's messing my car up. And then I thought about, they're always talking about getting things new and all this stuff. And before I could finish talking to myself about the rough road and they need to make the roads better, this big sign in front of me on the right-hand side said, Rebuild Alabama. And I said, Rebuild Alabama? The big sign here and all these patches. That's not rebuilding anything, that's just patching up. So I want to know how you feel about it since you said rebuilding Alabama a few minutes ago.
Well, I don't remember that reference, but there's nothing I hate more than a pothole. I live on South Side, so I get a lot of them. So I'm all in favor. I'm also opposed to the notion that we're paying marketing companies quite a bit of money to put up signs that say rebuild Alabama. I mean, don't tell me you're going to do it, just do it. That's what I want. So I'm with you. And I appreciate that. I guess I've used up my time, but thank you so much. It's really a privilege to speak to you.
We got a little something for a certificate of appreciation. I don't have it for these. So we have a certificate of appreciation as our lunchtime speaker.
Thank you.
And we have a lead cup, which is to remember us by.
Awesome. Have a good day.